WTIC, Todd Feinberg. We're talking the union concession deal. And we've had a lot of Republicans and conservatives and small government types on, and now we go to Representative Mike D'Agostino, who is a Democrat. And I don't know why we don't have more Democrats on today. If you know any, Mike, who might want to come on, would you tell them to call in?
I can think of a few.
Can you explain to us, from your perspective, why it was a good vote that you made in support of this package of, well, this agreement?
Well, I had the privilege of actually taking the agreement out on the House floor, and I guess I would kind of flip that and ask the question, why wouldn't you vote for this? I mean, $1.5 billion, more than $1.5 billion in savings over the biennium, the next 2 years, $24 billion in savings over 20 years. We pay off our unfunded liability completely in 30 years. Structural changes to pensions, overtime, health care. I mean, you name it, it's in there. And I guess the equivalent that's being thrown around is that we could have done all this statutorily, but I mean, I'm looking at the Hartford Courant editorial that came out today, which called that a long shot, and I would say that actually is an understatement. I mean, any attempt to do this legislatively or statutorily, as the code word has been used, first of all, I don't think the votes were there in the House or the Senate, but even if they were, that would have required the governor to sign off on statutory changes to how we collectively bargain in Connecticut. And he was not going to sign any bill before him that would turn this state into Wisconsin. So the idea that there was this statutory alternative, I think, was sort of fanciful. And so faced with that and the significant savings and structural changes that this deal yielded, to me it's an easy answer to that question. And so I would ask the other question, which is what was the actual alternative that people were proposing that actually had a chance of succeeding?
Well, it's hard to know what has a chance of succeeding if nobody's arguing for it or if there's no chance of it occurring. People move towards where they might see an opening rather than do a pie-in-the-sky thing. But there's a great loss. For me as just a taxpayer, I don't understand why there is collective bargaining for state workers. I don't understand why there are contracts signed that are so rich for state workers that they multiple times and willingly give stuff back. The $1.5 billion, if that number is an accurate number, is a confession in my mind of how overpaid this process results in public sector workers becoming.
Well, I mean, when you say overpaid, I mean, you know, the average line worker making $60,000 a year is going to retire with a pension of about $25,000 a year. I mean, and I realize that's more than most people have in the private sector, but the trade-off you make for public sector employment, where you pay less than the private sector, is that defined benefit type retirement plan, by the way, which is now changing with the new class of employees that this deal creates, who will have a hybrid defined benefit, defined contribution plan, exactly the kind of thing that I know the Republicans were advocating for. And by the way, I mean, I would just counter your assertion that people weren't advocating for an alternative. I mean, Len Fasano does a masterful job and did a masterful job in the Senate yesterday advocating for his alternative.
No, I wasn't saying he wasn't advocating for a alternative at all. What I was saying is he's supporting collective bargaining rights, which I don't understand why state workers are so scared of you elected officials screwing them, when in fact what you're doing is giving them, as you just admitted, better benefits than you get in the private sector.
Well,
why in the world does somebody working for the state get better?
Debate. I mean, there's a good debate to be had on that, and we've got actually a pretty equal history to look back to in Connecticut. We've got about 40 years from 1935 or so of no collective bargaining, and then we've got about 40 years from 75 on of collective bargaining. And we can compare the two. And the reason you move to collective bargaining in states like Connecticut, and by the way, in most states, contrary to what people have been saying, most states in this country, collective bargaining for state employees is legal. It's only in 4 states where it's not. The reason you do that is to have a stable workforce, to attract people into the to the various fields. And what you also want to do is avoid the kind of piecemeal favoritism that occurred for 4 decades in this state with respect to one class or another, one party favoring these workers versus those workers. And you eliminate all of that with collective bargaining. Now, the fact that the legislature early on in collective bargaining didn't fund its obligations isn't a problem with collective bargaining at all. That's a problem with the legislature.
Well, it's a problem with trusting the legislature to do it. Obviously, they can't be trusted to do it, right?
Which is exactly why you have a contractual commitment now that forces you to fund these obligations. The only reason we've actually been paying in now for the last few years to our pension obligations is because we are contractually obligated to do so, and the Constitution, the contracts clause of the Constitution, obliges us to live up to those commitments. It forces us to live up to our contractual commitments. So to me, I mean, it all sort of works kind of seamlessly together. And by the way,
except that the money's not there.
Well, but this deal now helps the money be there. I mean, this reduces the big savings in.
All right, excuse me. I love talking to you. Can you stay around a little longer?
Sure,
I've got to take a break. Yeah. We're talking with Representative Mike D'Agostino. All right. Enough of that racket. State Representative Mike D'Agostino is here. We didn't pick that song out for you, sir.
Yes, sir.
All right, so you're unusual for an elected official because you actually stand up for things that you believe in, and you're not mealy-mouthed about it. So it's a pleasure to talk to you, even though I don't agree with anything I think probably that you believe. So,
although I'm going to try to convince you of the benefits of this deal. I think.
Good. Well, first, so you mentioned that there were 40 years without collective bargaining, followed by 40 years with collective bargaining. Mm-hmm. And I'm curious how many givebacks there were in the 40 years without collective bargaining.
Well, it's not that there's givebacks in the 40 years without collective bargaining. It's that in that time period, there is no collective bargaining, so the legislature just simply sets year to year, here's what you get for a pension, here's what you get for wage an hour. Yep. And it was in that time period, by the way, when collective bargaining didn't exist, that they created the infamous Tier 1 employees who, when they retired, there was free health care, you didn't have to contribute anything to your pension, et cetera. It was only with the advent of collective bargaining, when the employees got to the table, that they actually started as part of that process paying toward their pension and their health care. Collective bargaining led to that. It was 40 years of no collective bargaining where you had arguably the richest contracts because, I mean, in that circumstance, you really have the prospect of sort of legislative capture. A particular group can come to the legislature, lobby for something, and get it on a year-to-year basis.
But that seems to me what we've done is taken that away from splinter groups and done it en masse. So now the whole body of workers negotiate as a single unit to and leverage Democrats into giving them as much as possible, so much that sometimes Democrats come back to them and say, you have to give us some of it back because we went way overboard on that one, and now the state's going into bankruptcy.
But most of what's giving back is actually reversing that trend of those first 40 years where that Tier 1 was created. And again...
but if you didn't have contracts, you could do that anytime you wanted. You could say, what we gave you last year, we can't give you that this year.
Yeah, you could do that, but you know what you also get? Strikes. In return for collective bargaining, state workers cannot strike by law. So let's say you get
but you could still have that law.
Let's say you win. You get rid of collective bargaining tomorrow, and you say, you know what? Next year we're not giving you any raises, and we're taking away your pension and health care. And next year we're doing the same thing. And the year after that we're doing the same thing. First of all, how many people are going to stay in the job, which are already understaffed as it is? And second, you think lines of the DMV are bad now? When those workers say, you know what, we haven't gotten a raise in 3 years, they took away our pension, you know what, we're calling a strike. That's illegal right now for state workers to do.
Well, it could be illegal anytime. I would just call up my favorite Democrat in Hamden and say, Mike D'Agostino, go pass a law saying they can't go on strike.
You can't do that and take away collective bargaining. Then we're
Why?
Probably, then
you can do whatever you want. You guys run the state.
Be subject to suit under federal law. So because that's a First Amendment right, basically. So the question is, what does this bargain? What does this give us? Right? What can we get out of collective bargaining? And to me, in addition to sort of that stable state workforce, the ability to sort of get these concessions, each time you collectively bargain, by its nature, you get concessions. That's what a collectively bargained for agreement means. Each side gives something. And we've gotten in the past wage concessions, we've gotten in the past pension contributions, healthcare premium increases, et cetera, and we're getting that now. And in return, right, for this current deal, and I know you've been talking about this, there's two main components that we give, right? The no layoff provision for 4 years through 6/30/21, and the extension of the pension and healthcare piece to 2027. But I would argue the extension of the healthcare and pension piece is fine because it includes exactly the structural changes that are going to save us money. And on a no layoff clause, keep this in mind. This is very important, I think, because it hasn't been reported enough. It doesn't apply to new employees hired after 7/1/17. So those people do not have job security. It doesn't apply if you turn down a transfer due to a reorganization. It doesn't prevent reorganizations. It doesn't apply for cause either. I mean, it doesn't mean you just can't show up for work now and you've got job security. You can be laid off for cause.
Well, that seems unfair. Where is your compassion? These are people with families. All right, Representative, I'm sorry, I've got to hold you there. So
I'll come back anytime. There's plenty of stuff to talk about on this, and it's a great debate on collective bargaining that I'm happy to have with you down the road.
Yeah, and it's really great discussing it with you. I appreciate the tone and approach you take. Thank you so much.
Thanks for the opportunity.
That is State Representative Mike D'Agostino. He's from Hamden.